AVRant and SVS have teamed up to bring you an unbelievable opportunity. Have you been dreaming of dual subwoofers? Perhaps you'd like to upgrade your entire 5.1 speaker package. Don't have the cash? AVRant and SVS have your back. Go to www.avrant.com right now for your chance to win your choice of dual PB1000 subwoofers or a prime 5.1 satellite speaker package. Contest ends September 30th. Don't wait. Open to the residents of the United States and Canada. We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to AVRant. I'm Tom Andry, and I'm here with
Rob H.
Okay. Andrew writes us on Facebook. He's finally going to take our advice and build a door. As a stopgap, he's been experimenting with near-field speaker placement and has found the results to be pretty decent. What are our thoughts in general on using near-field placement to minimize room problems?
And he is talking about his subwoofer as well in this case, putting his subwoofer physically very close to his seat. And he's like, you know what? That sounds better than before. Like, he still has an open space. He doesn't have a door yet. So he's trying to pressurize basically his whole house at the moment.
Right.
But he moved his sub physically closer to him. He's like, that sounds better. So
wow, I'm not surprised about that because you were sitting physically closer to it. But at the same time, you're talking about speaker placement, like actual speakers as well, or is he just talking about the sub?
I think he's mostly talking about the sub.
Oh, yeah. Because I prepped this question based on the speakers.
We can do that too because it both apply.
Yeah, so I see this all the time whenever you go to a trade show. There's always somebody who's got a booth set up with their speakers, and it's on a loud floor. So what they do is they put you in a chair and they put the speakers about 18 inches from your face and play them so that you can hear basically how these things sound, even in this very loud. Now that they're playing pretty loud and they're like, oh, don't they image well? Don't they do this? And of course they're sitting right there next to you. They're basically headphones at this point. And they do. You sit there and you're like, wow, that's really too loud for me to sit here for very long. But I do have a better idea of what your speakers sound like based on this because it's blocking out a lot of this other noise. And the things that we're often talking about with home theater is reflections, right? You get the direct sound directly at you, and you don't. By the time the reflections, if you're sitting in a normal sized room, by the time the reflections come back, your brain can kind of ignore them a little bit better than they could if it's just a millisecond or two right afterwards, where your brain gets confused. So there's nothing wrong with near field. I mean, that's how they mix movies. All those speakers are very, very near field, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's rarely practical. That's really what it comes down to for me. Like it's like I put my speakers 2 feet away from me all the way around. It sounds great, and I don't have any room treatments, and it's in a marble house. I'm like, okay.
Well, yeah, the ratio of direct to reflected sound by having your speakers much closer, very much higher because you're hearing that direct sound more directly.
And this is a perfectly valid way to place your speakers. It's just, like I said, not very practical. At the same time, a lot of speakers, especially home theater speakers, are not built. And we talked about this on this podcast many years ago with Shane Rich of RBH. And I asked him about this because I think it was actually your question, Rob.
Might have been, yeah.
Because you had asked about studio monitors, self-powered studio monitors versus home theater speakers, and why can't we use studio monitors versus home theater speakers? And his response, if I remember correctly, was those are tuned for near field response, whereas home theaters are tuned for sitting further away, and that allows that speaker, that sound, to get to whatever the speaker designer wanted it to sound like. They were not sitting 2 feet away from it; they were sitting 8 feet away from it or 10 feet away from it, and that's giving them the proper sound. So I mean, I've got no problem with near field response with speakers. I just feel if you're going to do that, you should probably buy speakers that were designed for near field response.
Now on the subwoofer side, it's a little bit different because they'll sometimes refer to subwoofers as minimum phase devices, which is basically a fancy way of saying all you're ever hearing are reflections. Because the sound waves that you're producing are so low, that they're so long, that they're always bouncing off of something before you're actually even getting one full cycle of the thing. And they're also basically, your brain isn't going to detect just a single cycle. There has to be a few cycles of that thing to play for your brain to even register that there was a sound that low playing. And we're talking like the under 40 hertz stuff when we're talking about that. But, that's a significant part of what hopefully your subwoofer is playing. So this idea of moving it closer to you to get, I don't know, like better frequency response or something, you're going to have a different wave pattern because you've moved the position of the sub. Maybe that's one reason it sounds better.
Now, it's also the fact that if you put the subwoofer in the middle of the room, and that's where you're sitting, let's just say. I mean, that's not, for a single subwoofer, that's not a bad placement for the subwoofer. If you think about where we're asking to place it midpoint of the wall. So the phantom subwoofer, which doesn't actually work this way, but the phantom subwoofer would be middle of the room, like dead center of the room. So taking a single subwoofer and putting it near the center of the room, that's not a bad placement if you only got one. We never tell you to do that because no one's ever going to do that.
I mean, according to that Harman research that we're basically quoting from whenever we talk about dual sub or quad sub placement, they were saying, like, honestly, if you have a rectangular room, the best place you could put one sub is a quarter of the way from the left wall, a quarter of the way from the front wall, or quarter of the way from the right wall, quarter of the way from the rear wall, whatever, but a quarter of the way into the room. Frequency response-wise for a single sub, that would be the best. Maybe, by chance, you got something pretty close to that by putting it close to your seat. So maybe the frequency response is genuinely better in your room because it's simply in a different place. But the other part of it is people often say, well, I feel like I get more of a kick from a kick drum, or I feel like I get a louder response. Now, if you were to measure the sound pressure level, it won't actually be that much higher because, again, stuff is bouncing around your room so much. That's such a huge contributor to the actual overall sound pressure level in the deep, deep bass. But what you are getting is that very initial hit. Like, have you ever watched those Mythbusters things where they show us an explosion in super slow-mo, and you can actually see the dome of the first concussion pressure wave that's coming out of that explosion? Now, if you had a wall, you would see that wave reflect off the wall and come back into the room. And if you have multiple walls, it'll bounce back and forth between them. You would see that wave moving back and forth. On Mythbusters, they're doing it outside, so you just see the front of that wave expanding outward, and then it disappears. Well, you are getting that first initial concussive hit that much stronger by having the source of that first concussive hit near to you. That is actually happening. So everything about near field placement, it can work. It absolutely can work. But if you measure the overall sound pressure, and particularly if you measure from seat to seat to seat, that's where the issue comes in. So, if you have one seat, and that's it. It's that's the only seat you care about. Near fields, I mean, HSU was all over this, right? HSU was all about, like, yeah, absolutely, try putting it near field, because if you only care about one seat, you can get really good results sometimes.
Well, and not only that, and the other thing about near field is that a lot of subs have ports, and you can physically feel the wind off of them sometimes, and that is a non-negligible effect on you. I mean, I've told this story multiple times, but I used to think there was ants in Grauman's Chinese Theater because I would feel things on my leg, and I finally realized that it was every time the bass would hit, I'd be like scratching my ankles, and I was like, what the heck's going on down there? And it was the wind coming off of the subwoofers, basically, that was blowing up my pant leg and shaking the hairs on my leg, and I would be like, oh, it must be ants or something down there. This place is filthy.
When you say pants flapping, it's literal.
It's literal. That's exactly what it is. So, I mean, the door. Okay, let's go back to the door. Slow clap. Slow clap for the door. Yes. This is going to be great, okay? Build the door, put the door up there, and then let's start over and see how great we can make this thing, okay? So, thanks for your question. Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.